There is a curious ache known only to those who have waited. Waited not for riches, not for fame, not even for miracles, but for love to return home. For the voice of a parent to finally say, "I see you." For a brother or sister to stand beside you, not in rivalry but in grace. For a family that was meant to be a shelter to stop feeling like a storm. But what happens when the place you were supposed to be safest becomes the place of your deepest wounds? What if the very hands that were meant to nurture you grew too broken to hold you? You see, many walk through life wearing invisible scars, scars not caused by war or poverty, but by silence, by absence, by emotional hunger that was never acknowledged. It's one thing to fight against enemies from the outside. It's another thing entirely when the war is within your own bloodline, when you're constantly wrestling with the emptiness that your own family left behind. And yet, this is not a speech of despair. This is not a eulogy for the love you never received. This is a proclamation of divine intervention. Because when the people who were supposed to love you the most fail to rise to the calling, God does not abandon the mission. He simply reroutes it. God, in His mysterious wisdom, often sends a stranger with the very blessing your family withheld, a teacher, a mentor, a friend, a neighbor, or someone you meet in the most unexpected place. And they carry in their hands what your soul has cried out for in silence: affirmation, protection, encouragement, direction. And you wonder, why would a stranger care more for me than my own kin? But perhaps the stranger isn't random at all. Perhaps they were divinely appointed. Angels in human form, sent to show you that love isn't limited by bloodlines. This is where divine irony dances. The one who was supposed to break you only helped clarify what you truly needed. And the one who was supposed to be temporary, a passerby, became the one who helped rebuild you. God often uses the unfamiliar to repair the damage done by the familiar. He uses those who were never part of your pain to become part of your healing. Because when your foundation is cracked by the people who should have supported you, God sends builders who know how to pour new cement. Kindness, wisdom, faith, and care. And in this strange act of redemption, the orphan spirit in you begins to feel at home again, not through inheritance, but through divine alignment. Ask yourself this: how many blessings have entered your life not through your bloodline, but through strangers? Have you ever stopped to consider that maybe that kind boss, that unexpected friend, that spiritual leader was heaven's way of responding to what your earthly family failed to give? Family, as defined by the world, is biology. But in God's kingdom, family is obedience. It is love in action. It is healing handed over without condition. And sometimes the person who most reflects God's heart toward you is not the one who shares your name, but the one who shares your burden. There is a sacred truth hidden here. When your family is too broken to bless you, God will not let your destiny crumble in the ruins. He will raise up strangers who become instruments of His love. Because your purpose is not dependent on their ability to love you. It is dependent on God's ability to provide, and He is never late. So lift your head, child of sorrow. Your healing may not come from the direction you expected, but it will come. Your restoration may not wear the face of your brother or mother or father, but it will wear the fingerprints of God. For He does not abandon the orphaned heart. He does not leave the neglected soul in the wilderness. He sends a stranger, and through them you find your family in faith. The wound of family is real, but it's not the end of the story. There is no wound quite like the one that comes from home. It is sharp, personal, and lingers longer than almost any other pain. When love is denied by the people who were supposed to give it freely, the ache is not just emotional, it's spiritual. It disrupts the very blueprint of belonging, the sacred architecture of identity. A father's silence, a mother's coldness, a sibling's betrayal. These are not just disappointments, they are spiritual fractures that alter how a soul sees itself and the world. But it must be said clearly, God does not overlook the weight of that wound. He does not ask you to pretend it didn't hurt. He does not diminish its effect. In fact, God's compassion meets you most intimately in those very places. The pages of Scripture are not shy about showing us broken families, Cain and Abel, Joseph and his brothers, David and his children. Even Jesus was misunderstood and dismissed by his own. The pattern is ancient, and God's intervention is always faithful. There is something holy in admitting that you were wounded by those who should have loved you. It is not weakness, it is not bitterness, it is clarity. Only in truth can healing begin. You cannot heal what you pretend didn't happen, and God will never demand your silence about suffering. Instead, He listens, He collects every tear, He marks the days you felt alone in your own house and whispers, "This pain will not go to waste." Sometimes people around you try to minimize your hurt. "But they're your family," they say, as if blood alone should excuse cruelty, as if genetics should be enough to erase neglect. But heaven doesn't operate on those terms. God is not interested in preserving appearances. He is interested in healing hearts. And to do that, He must acknowledge the wound fully, not gloss over it with shallow comforts. What's important to understand is this: just because your beginning was bruised does not mean your entire story will bleed. The first chapters may be filled with silence and shadows, but God is the author, and He has not yet finished writing. The wound is real, yes, the pain is real, but so is the healing that waits on the other side. So is the restoration that He is already planning, one quiet miracle at a time. Perhaps you thought your life would never move beyond what your family failed to give you, but heaven disagrees, because where others were too broken to offer you what you needed, God is too faithful to leave you empty. He will send what you need, even if it doesn't come wrapped in a familiar name. And when it arrives, you will know that you were never forgotten. Not by God, not by grace. What they broke, He will rebuild. What they missed, He will send. And the wound, though deep, will one day be the reason someone else finds hope. For God wastes nothing, not even your pain. God sends healing through unexpected vessels. God does not always choose the obvious path when He begins to answer your prayers. Often, His greatest blessings arrive not in the form you expect, but in ways that seem almost invisible, until the moment they change everything. When the very people who were supposed to love you most have nothing left to give, or worse, have chosen to withhold love altogether. God does not sit in silence. He moves. But His movement doesn't always follow tradition. Sometimes He sends strangers to do what family could not. There is a sacred pattern throughout the Bible, God using the unexpected to bless the overlooked. Ruth finds favor not in her homeland, but in the fields of a man who didn't know her story. Joseph, abandoned by brothers, finds his purpose in a foreign land where strangers recognize his value. Even the man who helped the beaten traveler on the road was not his kin, but a Samaritan, someone he was taught to distrust. These stories aren't exceptions. They are blueprints. They show us that heaven is not bound by family dysfunction. God's provision is not limited by your bloodline. When your soul is starving for affirmation, guidance, or compassion, God does not leave you in the famine. He sends manna, but the manna rarely looks like home-cooked meals from the hands you dreamed of. Sometimes it's a mentor who sees your potential when your parents only saw your flaws. Sometimes it's a friend who shows up for you more than your siblings ever did. Sometimes it's a spiritual guide, a counselor, a neighbor, or even a stranger who notices your silent struggle and chooses to care. These people are not coincidences, they are assignments, heaven's response to the needs your family ignored. You see, God knows that some homes are too broken to build anything, so He builds something new around you. Something not based on shared DNA, but on shared healing. And it's in those spaces that you start to believe again, not just in people, but in the possibility of love that isn't attached to pain. The beautiful irony is this: it is often those who owe you nothing who give you everything, because they are not acting out of guilt, obligation, or tradition. They are acting out of obedience to a spiritual call that they themselves may not fully understand. But you understand. Deep within, something begins to shift. The hole your family left doesn't feel so empty anymore. The ache begins to ease. Never underestimate the stranger who steps in with kindness. Never dismiss the person who shows up with what your family was supposed to offer but didn't. That person may just be God's way of saying, I saw what they didn't give you, and I'm giving it to you now, through someone you never expected. The healing comes. It just may not come from the place you begged for it. Instead, it comes from the hand you never knew to ask for, but the one God sent, precisely when your heart could finally receive it. You are not forgotten just because your family failed you. There's a quiet lie that seeps into the soul when you're raised in an environment of emotional absence, the lie that you are forgettable, that if those who are meant to love you the most couldn't find it in themselves to see you, choose you, or care for you, then maybe you're not worth being remembered at all. This is not just a passing thought. It becomes a heavy whisper that echoes in the soul long after childhood, long after the door to the past has supposedly closed. But here is a truth that silences that lie. You are not forgotten by God, not for a second, not on the days you were neglected, not when your birthdays went unnoticed, not when your pain was dismissed, and not when your cries were met with silence. His eyes never left you, even when the people you trusted most turned away. God does not measure your worth by the brokenness of your family. He does not tally your value based on how others treated you. In fact, the very reason He draws so near to the brokenhearted is because He knows how deep the injury goes when it comes from those you once looked to for safety. The rejection of family doesn't just sting, it cuts into your identity. But God comes to mend not just your heart, but your sense of self. He sees the tears you never let fall. He reads the words you wrote in secret journals or whispered in prayers under your breath. He watched you shrink yourself, trying to fit into the narrow expectations of a family that didn't have the capacity to celebrate your spirit. And He did not ignore it. He remembered every detail. There's a divine memory at work in your life. While others moved on without apology or awareness, God took notes. He saw what you endured. He observed the emotional winters that others called normal, but that left you frozen inside. And He made a decision not just to comfort you, but to rewrite the narrative. Not through vengeance, but through restoration. Your story was never abandoned. It was only paused, waiting for God's hand to turn the page. And when He does, you'll find yourself surrounded by what you never had, not because you earned it, but because He promised you wouldn't be left with nothing. And God never breaks His promises. The enemy often uses family failure to convince people they have no future. But God uses the same failure to show you His faithfulness. If you had received everything you needed from your family, you might have settled for a small life. But because you lacked, You learn to look beyond blood. You learn to look to God. And in looking, you will find that He has always looked at you with eyes full of favor. The silence of your family was not the silence of heaven. While they forgot to speak life into you, heaven was writing plans for your redemption. While they left the table empty for you, God was preparing a banquet in your honor. Every overlooked moment, every missed hug, every withheld word of encouragement, God has kept record, not to punish them, but to bless you in ways that will make it impossible to believe you were ever unseen. God restores through divine substitutions. There are moments when it becomes painfully clear the people you were depending on to love you simply can't. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's their own wounds, their own limitations, their own shattered past that stop them from offering what your soul desperately needs. You wait for a father to affirm you, but he doesn't know how. You long for a mother to comfort you, but she's too lost in her own fears. You seek friendship or understanding from a sibling, only to find coldness or indifference. But the absence of what was supposed to be doesn't mean the end of hope, because while man fails, God substitutes. When He sees that the original design has been damaged beyond human repair, He introduces divine replacements, not as second-rate versions, but as sacred assignments sent to complete what others could not begin. This is not a rejection of your family. It is a recognition of reality. Some people are simply not equipped to carry the emotional or spiritual responsibility that comes with loving you rightly. And when that becomes clear, God steps in, not with condemnation, but with restoration. He substitutes the broken with the faithful. He replaces pain with peace. And He doesn't do it slowly. He does it at the exact moment your heart is ready to receive what is real. Think of the moments when you were at your lowest, when you were searching for someone, anyone, to understand what you couldn't say out loud. And then suddenly, a person entered your life who didn't just hear you, but saw you. They gave without needing to be asked. They stayed when others walked away. They reminded you that love, when real, doesn't need blood to be binding. These are not coincidences. They are divine substitutions. God sends them to prove a point. He is not limited by your history. He is not confined by your past. When He wants to bless you, He doesn't need permission from your bloodline. He will use someone who has no idea about your background, but who carries exactly what your soul has needed all along. This is how God works. He takes what was meant to define you in pain and redefines it in power. He brings mothers to the motherless. He sends fathers to the father wounded. He raises up protectors, encouragers, mentors, and guides who carry what your family dropped. And as they pour into you, something miraculous happens. You begin to heal, not only from what they give you now, but from what was denied to you then. What's even more powerful is this: God's substitutions don't just fill the gap, they expand it. What you receive is not equal, it's greater, because divine love doesn't replace with copies, it restores with upgrades. The friend you now have is more loyal than any sibling ever was. The mentor God sent gives more wisdom than your father ever did. The spiritual mother in your life affirms you in ways your birth mother never could. You begin to realize something sacred. Family is not only who you come from, but who God sends to walk with you. And every substitution becomes proof that God saw, God cared, and God acted on your behalf. You were always meant for a bigger family, the family of faith. There's a certain sorrow that follows those who have been let down by their own family. It clings to the soul like a shadow. It shows up in moments of celebration when no one from home is there to witness your growth. It appears during hard times when you instinctively reach for a sibling or a parent, only to remember the distance between you is not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, even eternal. And in those moments, the question burns, am I really alone in this world? But there is something greater than bloodlines, something more enduring than genetics or shared surnames, something eternal that doesn't break under pressure or fall apart when it's tested. It is the family of faith, the family that God Himself builds around you, and it is here, in this divine community, that many find what their earthly homes never gave them: safety, understanding, encouragement, and unwavering love. This family may not look like yours. They may not share your background, your traditions, or your history, but they share something deeper: your burdens, your calling, your spirit. These are the people who were sent, not by accident, but by assignment. They may have walked into your life quietly, but they remain faithfully, and that is no small miracle. The family of faith is built on a different foundation than your natural foundation. It is not formed in the womb, it is born in the Spirit. It is not held together by obligation, but by choice, by covenant, by shared suffering and shared hope. And in this kind of family, something miraculous happens. The orphaned soul finds a place to belong, not as a guest, but as a son or daughter in the house of God. When Jesus walked the earth, He made this clear. "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" He asked. Not to dishonor His family, but to reveal a deeper truth. He pointed to those who followed Him, those who obeyed God's will, and He said, "These are my family." This was not a rejection of earthly ties. It was an expansion, a holy invitation into a family where love is the law and grace is the glue. You were never meant to journey alone, and God knew that your family might not walk with you. He saw the pain of your isolation long before you understood it yourself. So He made a promise, not to fix what others refused to change, but to build something new around you, a spiritual home that would hold you together when everything else was falling apart. In the family of faith, you'll find brothers who don't compete but protect, sisters who don't gossip but intercede, fathers who cover, mothers who nurture, friends who sharpen and stay. These people may not be known by your blood, but they are known in your spirit. When they speak, it resonates, not because you've heard those voices all your life, but because you've waited your whole life to hear them. And here's the beauty of it all. The bigger family that God places you in will always be more aligned with your purpose than the one that misunderstood your calling. While your natural family may have rejected your dreams, your spiritual family will fan the flames of your destiny. They were designed to walk with you into places your past could never reach. God never promised perfect families, but He did promise fellowship, covering, and community. And when you step into His family, you step into a story that's no longer defined by what you lacked, but by what He supplied. The pain of rejection becomes the platform for redemption. Rejection is a strange teacher. It arrives without warning, sharp and cold. It pushes you out of circles you thought would protect you. It shuts doors you never imagined would close on you. And when it comes from your own family, it doesn't just sting, it shatters. Because to be rejected by a stranger is tolerable, but to be rejected by those who help bring you into this world feels like the undoing of your very existence. And yet, in the kingdom of God, rejection is never the end. It is the beginning of a redirection. What man uses to cast you aside, God uses to raise you up. The very pain that was meant to bury you becomes the soil where your calling begins to grow. Because rejection doesn't have the final word, redemption does. When Joseph was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, it looked like the story was over. They had stripped him of his robe, mocked his dreams, and left him for dead. But God wasn't done. That pit became the first step toward the palace. What they meant for evil, God was already planning to use for good. The betrayal wasn't a curse. It was a setup for divine favor, not in the familiar land of home, but in the unfamiliar arms of strangers who would later see what his own family never could. This pattern is not unique to Joseph. It is echoed in the lives of countless people who have been rejected by their own blood, and yet somehow the pain does not destroy them. It refines them. It clarifies what truly matters. It strips away dependency on the approval of others and replaces it with a hunger to be aligned with God's voice above all. When rejection wounds you, God does not ignore the bleeding. He bends down into your ache. He does not offer hollow words like, "Get over it." Instead, he says, "I know exactly what it feels like." For even his own son was rejected by his hometown, by his people, by his disciples in his hour of need. Jesus walked the full path of betrayal, abandonment, and denial, but he did not allow rejection to define him. He allowed it to fulfill prophecy, to turn the cross into a crown. And that is what God wants to do with you. The very people who said you weren't good enough, the voices that told you that you'd never be seen or loved, become echoes in the background of a much louder truth. You are chosen, even if you were not accepted. You are beloved, even if you were cast out. And every no from man becomes a yes from God, an invitation to step into a place of purpose so powerful that your past will not be able to compete with what is to come. The pain of rejection does not mean you are defective. It means you are being redirected. And when that pain is surrendered to God, it becomes the platform where His glory shines brightest, because only someone who has been broken can be trusted to carry the oil of healing. Only someone who knows the sting of abandonment can truly embrace the value of divine companionship. God is not afraid of your rejection. He specializes in lifting the rejected into places their family never believed they'd reach. And when He does, even those who once rejected you will have to witness what only God could do with a heart that refused to grow bitter and chose to trust instead. What they withheld will return to you in greater measure. When love is withheld, it creates a hunger that echoes through every part of the soul. You feel it in conversations where you wait for affirmation that never comes. You sense it in moments of accomplishment when the people you most wanted to celebrate you are silent. You ache not just because of what happened, but because of what never did. The love you deserved, the support you hoped for, the kind words you long to hear. When your own family withholds these, it can feel like you've been cut off from your rightful inheritance, not of money, but of meaning. But God is not only a healer of wounds, He is a restorer of loss. And He never watches something be withheld from His child without preparing something greater to replace it. The world teaches that if someone denies you something, you've simply missed out. But heaven doesn't work like that. In the divine economy, what is stolen is multiplied in return. What is withheld unjustly is returned with divine interest. You may have waited years for a father's approval, only to have God send a spiritual father who gives you more wisdom and love in 1 hour than you received in decades. You may have longed for a mother's embrace, only to discover a stranger's care that wraps around your soul like a healing balm, softening scars you had forgotten were there. God sees every withheld blessing. He keeps a record, not for revenge, but for restoration. And His restoration is never a simple replacement. It is always abundant. Because He is not interested in just filling the empty spaces. He wants to overflow them with proof that your story was never in the hands of those who failed you. It was always in His. Think about it. Why does God allow you to go without, only to later bless you through a stranger? Because it proves something vital, that His love is not conditional, nor is it confined. He doesn't wait for others to do right by you. He steps in Himself, using the hands of others to deliver blessings that were always meant for you. There is a mystery in how God works. He turns lack into longing, longing into prayer, and prayer into provision. And the beauty of that provision is that it often comes through vessels you never anticipated. The co-worker who encourages you daily, the friend who checks in when your own sibling never does, the pastor or mentor who believes in you more than your parents ever could. These are not just people. They are carriers of promises God made to your heart long ago. And when the blessing comes, it brings healing not just to your present, but to your past. You begin to realize that you are not unworthy just because someone failed to love you. You are not invisible just because someone chose not to see you. You are not insignificant just because someone didn't know how to treasure you. What they failed to give was never the measure of your worth. It was simply the stage God used to reveal His generosity. When God gives, He gives in greater measure, and what once felt like absence becomes the setup for abundance. What they withheld, God returns, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. So now stand still for a moment and reflect. The home that failed you was never the only home God had in mind. The love that didn't arrive in your childhood is not lost forever. It is being rewritten in new relationships, restored through unfamiliar faces, and returned in greater measure by divine hands. You may have been hurt by those who shared your blood, but you are being healed by those who share your burden. And that is no small miracle. For every moment you were unseen, unheard, unheld, God was preparing a substitute. And not a substitute in pity, but one in power. He knew your family would be too broken to carry what your soul needed, so He chose others, strangers by the world's standards, but chosen ones in the kingdom of heaven, to walk into your life and deliver the blessing. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. You are not too late. You are not too broken. You are being rebuilt in love. And the hands building you now were sent by the one who never forgot the prayers you whispered through your tears. God will use a stranger to give you what your family was too broken to provide, because He is a Father who always finishes what others abandoned. And He has only just begun.